Cuarto día de nuestro festival Al Sur del Sur, organizado por el Galpón Lab en colaboración con Corfo, la Universidad del Desarrollo y Red Hat. Hoy, en el día de la cuarta revolución industrial, vamos a hablar de innovaciones que están cambiando nuestra forma de vivir. Separamos muchas veces el mundo físico del mundo emocional, sin ver que la energía de lo que hacemos en el mundo físico proviene de nuestro interior. La motivación para aprender, para solucionar problemas, para lograr lo que nos proponemos, tiene que ver con cuánto sentido de pertenencia tenemos por lo que estamos aprendiendo, por los problemas que estamos resolviendo y por los proyectos que queremos lograr. La tecnología parece separarnos en muchos de estos aspectos, sin embargo, gente como David está ocupándola para unirnos, disponibilizando información y herramientas, principalmente tecnológicas, para co-crear soluciones que motiven a grupos, utilizando en todo este proceso algo que se llama aprendizaje significativo. Le damos la bienvenida a David Caballo, entonces, gracias por estar aquí con nosotros para contarnos tu experiencia. De ahora en adelante voy a hablar en inglés, pero vamos a tener traducción, así que muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Hello David, thank you for being here with us.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored and pleased to be with you. Especially as you introduce the subject, it's perfect. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So to introduce you to ourselves, please let us know first, what are you doing today? Which are your projects? Where are you?
Actually, because of the pandemic, I'm somewhere that I didn't expect to be, but I'm in the south of Brazil now. And so it's closer than usual, but still kind of far. And so I look forward to being able to actually visit and see and work with people. But right now I'm working with a group, Cinda, cinda.org, CINNDA.org, and with some friends, colleagues from Chile. And it's really exciting. It's the Center for Innovation Design. But the idea is that really on pragmatic and essential projects, and with people that come really from a kind of architecture design, but also Fab Lab background, and with the idea of well, what do we have to do to face the challenges that we do now, but to really make a better, more just and more sustainable world. And we have a project now in Antofagasta in the north, but also I don't know whether Chile just has so many different extreme cultures, so this is a very dry and arid place, and many of the same problems across the whole country. And the idea is like making a smart city, but typically, so I like the formulation that you make in terms of an internal world and an external world, because too often when people talk about a smart city, they only think of the technology. And the technology is going to do like a self-driving car or delivering packages faster, which takes some kind of work by the technology that we would consider somewhat intelligent, but isn't something that you would say makes a smart city. That a smart city is really made of smart citizens. And it functions in a way that makes the city more livable, better for everybody, more just, more equal, and also more sustainable, that it's more ecologically friendly. So we're trying to devise and work with people in a very kind of collaborative way about how to improve the quality of life in the city, but not just coming from people from the outside, but where the people inside see better how to design and implement the city that they would want.
That is a hard thing to do. How do you change the cultural way of living?
Well, again, I'll go back to something that you had said, is that people do have their feelings about what it is. And they do, it's like, what is quality of life? Well, it depends on people. What is justice depends on, that things happen for the right reasons, for the benefit of all, and not just the benefit of a few, or just, and so it's like, how do you do that? So people do have these things inside. And the idea is, people don't lack intelligence or creativity or an ability to collaborate. But what often happens is that it's not fairly distributed, or people don't have the proper resources, or people don't have the opportunity, or the good things that they do, nobody knows about it because it happens in isolation. And so Manuel Castells, the Catalan sociologist who's done beautiful work, and he was one of the first to recognize what he called, the internet society, like the importance of networks and what this was really changing in the world. And we see that, it's like having the ability now to do this on Zoom, and not just be face to face or voice on a telephone even. It's really quite amazing progress that lets things happen that otherwise were virtually impossible. And so regions that are more isolated, Patagonia, or, other places, it's just hard to reach and hard to do things. And so that's no longer true because of the technological advances that we made. But one of the problems when the technology is badly distributed is that it's people, let's say in one part of California or, one part here, very few places are able to like design the technologies, the tools that we use, and then they focus on the problems that they're aware of, that they can think about. So the issues that other people face that aren't in these very few centers, who's going to think about that? Who knows more about it are the local people. So now as the technologies are coming down in cost, and as we're able to communicate over distance in a much better way, we have the potential to let, it's kind of the democratization of invention, that it isn't just people in the best research labs or the best universities have access to the research material that's on the web. They aren't the only ones that have access to the most powerful tools. We're able to distribute them as the technology is becoming cheaper. So what was lacking wasn't human capacity. It was just opportunity and resource. And I think that we've kind of overcome. So now it's like, how do we build the talent, so that people can design and build properly in ways that work better for everybody. But in fact, the fact that it will be designed by people who live where they face their own issues, well, this is who better to do it in the right way.
In that way, you are being working a lot in education. What is something that you call the meaningful learning, and what does it has to do with all this process that you are talking us about?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, there's a odd distinction. The project that we're doing in Antofagasta is not per se, it's not in schools directly,
Okay.
but it's very much of a learning project because people will learn to about the things they're trying to think about. So it's like, what would be a better system for disposal of solid waste? How can you, when you have where there's so a high incidence of skin cancer because there's a high incidence or level of UV radiation, what's a way to improve the cities such that it becomes safer so that not so many people are exposed to the cancer? So there's a lot of learning, both in terms of using the tools and technologies in learning to program, but also in terms of the fields that you're starting to study that we don't really have a full answer to. So it's a very deep learning project, but it's going to happen outside the school. Well, one reason that we're confident, well, I mean, we've already started and we're already seeing beginning of some great results, but it is meaningful to people. It's their community, it's their city, it's their quality of life, it's their health. And so it's meaningful, and therefore people put in the work, people engage to do this. One of the problems in school as it's been is that too many kids are like, why do I have to learn this? What's the point? And then they don't engage. And even if we tell them, oh, now it's not useful, but 20 years from now it'll be useful. Well, 20 years from now, who remembers it anyway? If you did to learn it. And so it doesn't work as well because it's not meaningful. And even on a different way, it's a word in French. I assume it's probably the same in Spanish. It's like lacune in French, lacuna, I would assume in Spanish. But it's the idea of like something that I have a gap that I need to fill, right?
Laguna.
And so when you have this gap, it's meaningful, right? It's like, I need to fill this. And so I need to learn, I need to find out a way to start to do this. And so you engage, and you also have the framework to start to think about it. So it's like now, if you look at all the information that's on the web, my God, it's more than any one person could see. But it's not a lack of information that's a problem, that we see a lack of certain problems being solved. It's a lack of how can I think about it? How can I apply it? And what can I do with it? And so this is what we're hoping, and this is the idea, is that by engaging in working on meaningful problems, whether they're problems or not just problems, whether dreams that people have, what they would like to see, then people will engage, and then they have the framework to think about the problem in a way that you could actually get there. And then you see, it's like, we're not alone in solving this. And too much of work in school is just putting the kid by themselves, when the smarter way to solve problems is like, oh, if I know that, you know the answer, then, just ask you. Why not do that? And so, so it's changing the formulation of school. So it's not just on transmission of information, but it's on the construction of knowledge. So these ideas about, that they call 21st century skills of problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, these ideas, well, make that the work of what kids do as they learn. And if they're working on problems, and this has been our experience for a long period of time, if they're working on meaningful problems, they will engage, they'll work harder than you can imagine. We've seen so many kids in schools that the teachers would complain, the parents would complain, they don't want to work, they don't want to think, they don't want to go to school. And then that turns around when they're able to work on things that they care about. It changes. You almost have to chase them home. It's like, go home, I want to have dinner, get out of school, will you? So it's a much nicer problem to have.
Could you tell us a little bit about an experience that you have in Brazil, maybe, or with some kids that you saw how they were behaving before you start working in all this idea of meaningful learning with technology and with solving problems that they could engage with, and after the project?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, and just so wonderful. So it's 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 like, I think in every project we've been in, we've had examples like that, and anywhere in the world, right? It's like, so whether it's in Boston, or whether it's in Brazil, or whether it's in Thailand, or in Senegal, or Rwanda in Africa, it's like it it always repeats. And so in this one school, we worked with the city of Sao Paulo here in Brazil has, I don't know, everybody you ask gives you a different number, but in the city itself, it has 11 million people, right? And in the metropolitan area, it's 20 million. And so when there was he was a new secretary of education for the municipality. And so we had known him before. And so we approached him as like, let's do this project of bringing technology into the schools to use for learning. Because too often when, we use the word technology, someone who's really been influential is Alan Kay, who worked at Xerox PARC. And so the invention of the mouse and bitmap graphics, object-oriented programming, this came out of his and his colleagues' research. And so Alan likes to say that technology is anything invented after you were born. So, so it's like, so to kids now, a smartphone isn't so much technology any more than glasses are technology, right? It's like, yeah, it's like what's in the world. And so, but we still tend to use, computers, let's say, in the same form that we taught school before we had computers. And so you don't necessarily, so people will talk about different things like an electronic whiteboard that can like take an image of what you're writing on the board. We call that technology, but it's a very, okay, it's fine, but it's not a really kind of empowering type of technology in the way that like programming a computer is, or constructing, from a fab lab is, and designing and constructing. So, it's a very different, and one of the big differences is that which technology are you using in an active, creative way that you're designing and constructing things, and which technology is just being used to, keeping you relatively passive. It's just giving you information. And so we call them all technology, but the use is really different. And so before we can talk about technology in schools, we really need to think not just do you have technology, you don't have technology, but what are you doing? And this is what makes for a good learning environment is how are you using it? What are you doing? And we find that when we let kids create on their own, according to their own ideas, using the technology, it's just a huge, it is empowering because the kids see something, not because it was entertaining or because it was easy, quite the contrary, because they know it's hard and then they still work and succeed. It's transformative because they believe in themselves as capable of doing something because of that. And they see that if I work and if I think, or we work as a team, we can do a lot. And so one project is, it's rather famous among us that was called the Intelligent Bus. So in the project in Sao Paulo, what I started to say is that when we approached the Secretary of Education, he said, I have 2 million kids in the schools, right? You can't just do a project for a few of them, do this little pilot, because quality for a few is a privilege. And so he challenged us is like, what can you do that can actually have impact through the city? Now, obviously you can't do one thing for 2 million kids and, another, whatever it was, 50,000 teachers, at the same time and have any quality. But we also didn't want to do something where like, okay, you do one school, 5 schools, 3 schools, because it's a huge system and that doesn't work either. So we had to think, and in this case, it was our challenge, a design challenge. How do you engage a large system like that and change the culture such that people think differently about learning and practice differently for learning and teaching? And so we gave what Paulo Freire called a generative theme. Is the idea is like you think of a theme, but everybody has their own idea about, well, what would I do, right? And we let them work in groups. And the idea, so in this case was, in Portuguese it was a cidade que a gente quer, the city that we want. And the idea was for the groups of students to enter and what are your dreams? What are the problems that you face? Okay, make something, but really make something that was functional to say, here's how we would improve life in the city. For the schools themselves, we didn't dictate. So we gave presentations. Sao Paulo divides itself into, at that time, 4 different districts. And we made a presentation in each of the districts, inviting all of the schools to show the kind of technologies, to show the ideas, and asking the schools to volunteer. Because like anybody, if you're forced to do something you don't understand, you don't want to do, it's not going to go well. On the other hand, we wanted them to come in, but we also don't know their schools. So what would work in their particular school was for them to propose. How would they want to help support the project was for them to propose. And then we opened, so we were able to open with 50 schools in the first year. So it's a significant number
That's a lot.
of people. Yeah, but with the idea is that building a team among the people that work for the Secretariat of Education in the city, that they are the team that really supports. So working with the University of Sao Paulo, working with my team from MIT, we then built this other team from the city, and then all together we go to support the other schools. But then after the first year, the team that can support is larger. You have the ideas that other schools did. The teachers and kids from the other schools help the next schools coming on. So it grows in a kind of organic way. So of the memorable projects, so we challenge the kids. It's like, okay, what's the biggest problem in Sao Paulo? And in this one school, the kids say, oh, it's violence. Okay, what would you do about violence? And we're thinking, what are they going to say? Who knows? But they come up with, well, what we need is a smart bus. And we're thinking, how is a smart bus going to improve
Of
work that?
violence.
Yeah. And they said, well, for their parents, it's really difficult. They live on the periphery of the city. They have to take 2 or 3 buses to get to work in the center of the city. The bus is crowded, it's overheated, it goes through bumps on the street, and and they have to take 2 or 3, and so it takes 2 to 3 hours to get to work, 2 to 3 hours to get home after working 9, 10 hours a day. So they say when our parents get home, they're tired, they're angry, they're aggravated, and they fight. So it's like, well, pretty good, right? And so this was their project. But this is before Uber. They had the ideas that, well, you could improve the bus network of the city so that instead of having to like, why should I have to take 3 different buses to get to where I'm going? couldn't this be better if when you get to the bus stop, you could tell the bus stop your final destination? And the bus stop then reorganizes the transportation for the city because it's kind of done in general. And it's the kind of thing that technology, so they invented something that Uber's made billions of dollars on, but they didn't get the credit for that, right? Or the money. But so these boys that did this project, there were 5 of them. And the teacher told us that, oh my God, these are the, they never come to school. But when they come to school, you wish they hadn't come. That is, oh my God, they're disruptive. These were the boys that were like telling you. So at that point in Sao Paulo, they had like 4 different rotations in the school. So in the morning would be one group of kids, in the afternoon, a different group, a late afternoon, early evening one, and night school for adults in
Wow.
the same school. Yeah. So it was really like that. And these boys were morning students and they stayed all through the day. They didn't go home. We really had to tell them at the end of the afternoon at 6, you know, please go home. And they stayed to keep working. And I saw, and this project was like more than 15 years ago when we started. And I saw, in a meeting of teachers in Sao Paulo a couple years ago, I saw the teacher from that group uh, at a conference, and she said those boys still stay in touch with her. In fact, one of
Wow.
them got in a little trouble and called her instead of the parents, right? Called the teacher. And so this changed, just this small experience changed that kid's relationship to the school, themselves, to the teacher, and to the community. Because instead of being treated as kids from the periphery that just cause trouble, and we have to watch them if they come in the store, they saw themselves and they became much more positive contributors to their communities.
So
Now, that's
that's
one
meaningful
story.
learning.
Exactly. We didn't tell them, okay, you have to work on this. Step 1 is that. Step 2 is this. And, also being in school is like another of the good stories from this is that we didn't have, like anything in public education, we had a very small budget. We had very little money, which we used mainly just to make sure that we could get people to support the schools and to have enough materials for the kids to work with. And we always tried to use really low cost computational materials as much as we could, but still didn't take away the power. And so they're, like we do in Fab Labs, it's like they're making their own sensors, they're building their own devices to start to understand what the
The whole
city would do.
process.
And this was a much better way to learn the math and the science and to
Mm.
communicate your ideas by building these projects because you had to figure out, can I make this work? And so it wasn't just important in mathematics or in physics that someone says, this is an important idea. They needed the idea in order to make their project work. And unlike problems in assessment, where we don't know, what do we really know? How well could you do it? Assessment is hard. And, but in one way, making real projects that have to function in the real world, it's the real world tells you you're not right yet, because it won't work. And so it's not just someone's opinion. It's like it's not working. So we augmented our materials by asking them to bring in broken things from home, right? So whether it was like a balance to weigh things, and and or broken tape recorder, people would bring in whatever they could that we would use to salvage the mechanisms from that. And at first we did this with the idea, it was actually one of my former students, Pablo Blickstein, it was his idea, and it was a brilliant idea, which is that we aren't just saving money here, but all of a sudden all these familiar objects that
Mm.
we have, we're not just recycling them, but now we have to think, how does this work? What's the mechanism? So when you step on a scale and it tells you how much you weigh, what's the mechanism? How does it know? Right? The kind of gear thing to move the tape at a proper speed when you're recording something. Well, we don't record that way anymore, but you had to think about it. So you're used to it and you never thought, oh, how does that work? But so you had to take it apart like a doctor so that you didn't break it worse, but you basically, oh, here's this, what's a mechanism? What am I using it? How could I repurpose this mechanism for something else? And so instead of having all this extra waste, all of a sudden people put it together, but the learning was fantastic. So, early in this project, the kids, so we're talking, well, what's an intelligent bus? And they say, oh, well, it's got air conditioning, so that it's cooler. It plays music because it's Brazil, right?
Of course.
But the bus will tell you when it's full. So and I say, okay, that's a great idea. How is the bus going to tell you when it's full? And you say, well, it knows that someone's sitting in every seat. Okay, how's the bus going to know that someone's in every seat? And nobody had an idea. I said, well, can you think of some other device that's like that, where if you press it, it knows it and it does something? Then one kid immediately said, oh, a keyboard. Keyboard is
Okay.
just like that. And so we took apart a keyboard, and then they start to see, oh, this is very easy. They had already done that kind of electronics where they see, oh, it's just making an electronic contact when it's pressed. But then it went even further, because then it said, well, it knows not just that someone's in every seat, it knows which seat is open. So so like in the way a keyboard knows you press the D or you press the O. And so then we looked at that, and that gave us the way to talk about Cartesian coordinates. So that you say, okay, it knows where you are on this plane, it knows where you are on that plane, and then it can say exactly where this is. And kid says, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Now, how often does that happen in a regular math class in school, that someone see you introduce Cartesian coordinates and they say, oh, it's brilliant. So it's again back to the meaningful part, because it was like, this is what Papert used to call a powerful idea. The idea of making these coordinates. And then you think about it, it's like when they started to understand how the vision of flies, right? Mosca in Portuguese, right? And it was basically kind of imagining that it's all right, now it's 3 dimensions. And so with the kids, then it went from something that nobody remembers from math class or nobody has a sense of using, to a kid really valuing the idea, but also seeing the extensions, that it isn't necessarily in 1 or 2 dimensions, but it could be in as many dimensions as you can imagine. So,
That's
uh,
amazing.
yeah, and there's so many stories. I could go on for like 5 days just telling you these stories.
So you told us a lot about this meaningful learning, and I want you to, in a resume, because you told us a lot about uh, what do we have to now teach to kids or to people in general? What is learning now, that for a world that we don't know which technology is going to have, which problems is going to have, which needs are going to we're going to have in the future. So what should we be teaching our kids? You said a lot, but like in lines, like what is this about for the future?
Well, that's the exact challenge. How you framed it is that, you know, who can predict the future, right? Who predicted this pandemic? Some people said we're going to have a pandemic, but nobody knew it would be this particular virus, or when it was going to happen, how it would spread, or, how do we, make a vaccine or build up resistance to it? And so this is the world we live in. It's not going back, right? We live in a world that, could you predict 10 years from now, 12 years from now, 15 years from now, what the world's going to look like and what the challenges would be? Absolutely not. What's going to be invented in the next 10 to 15 years? No way, right? So we can't predict that, but that's the big difference. 100 years ago, the world was more predictable.
That's
And
true.
so you could have an educational system that basically said, okay, if your father was a farmer, you'll probably be a farmer too. If your father was a carpenter, you'll probably work in the same general area. And but even now, to be a carpenter, as you see, you have a fab lab behind you, you have 3D printing. It's like a carpenter isn't a carpenter like it used to be, right? Hardly any job is the same as it was. And that's just going to accelerate. So so in the past, we could prepare kids for a relatively predictable future, but that time is gone. And so the way you phrased it is exactly right. It's like, we're preparing people to dream and imagine the new things that they want to see to make a better world, as well as to be able to have the capacity to deal with these unexpected challenges that we face. And one thing that we can know almost for certain is that problems from the environment, ecology, and climate change are coming, and they're going to be worse. And so the kind of things we need to do, not just to think about it 10 years from now, but immediately, to start to understand these kind of complex, dynamic, open systems that are going to keep changing. And we don't do a good job of that. So the best education now is the kind of thing that gets people used to this kind of critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and just getting more practice at that, but not just to do it. You know, again, between at our group, you know, Seymour Papert, Edith Ackerman used to say, you know, everybody talks about hands-on learning, you know, that you're, but you don't only want hands-on, you want heads in, so that it's not just, I made this. Why does it work? Why doesn't it work? I'm not sure, right? So it isn't just making, but it's thinking about what you're making and thinking about it critically and thinking about it, its role in society and how that can be also critically. So this is the part that we need to really change soon. Now, the biggest challenge in this, well, I guess my students always used to tease me that if I say the two biggest challenges, it's at least three I'm going to mention, right? So I don't count very well, but you know, there's several, which is that it's hard to change big organizations. And you know, even when we'd say, you know, school, and there's hardly any country in the world that thinks our schools are perfect for the future. You know, there's some that do a little bit better than everybody, but even the ones like in Singapore that do well, they say we really need to change for the future in order to really get better at innovation and 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 these ideas. And so even though they're in the testing always in the top one or two of the countries, that they know they still need to change for this future world. But changing big organizations is not easy. And changing the culture in them. So instead of it's like teacher in the front of the room telling you what to do, people taking notes, solving problems nobody cares about, and you know nobody's going to think about again. I mean, that's an extreme situation, but but that's not easy. The second is that it's not teachers' fault, but we haven't prepared our teachers for that either. Our teachers were still preparing. It was, in fact, a while ago, was a minister of education in Chile that told me, I don't mean to insult anybody, but the idea that he said was that the moment that one of our teachers graduates and is ready to enter schools to teach, they're already obsolete because you know they've been trained for the 100 years ago system instead of for now. And so how do we give teachers support? It's not their fault, but they haven't had that experience either in order to like, how could we take a more uh, focused way on thinking about how to solve these problems? How do we use technologies where the teachers themselves, all right, they use a smartphone maybe, but in terms of creating and designing with technology, they haven't thought about. And so it was something I wrote about a while ago and in my thesis. But I first came into it when I was working at Harvard University on the design of healthcare informatics to improve the quality of healthcare. And you know, what was triggered, and this is a while ago, but it was triggered by they had healthcare in the US at least was one of the early adopters of computers. But because they were one of the early adopters, they were stuck in the computing of the 1950s
Okay.
because it was so, you didn't want to change it because it was so important. And so the computers then were too obsolete. They needed to upgrade. But it was exactly the way you frame the problem. It's like, how do you design a new architecture for the healthcare that changes practice, that improves care, but also has to be open so that what gets invented 2 years from now, we can incorporate into our system and not have to start over all again. And that's what I called emergent design, which is the idea of like, you know, a lot of times in design education, we focus on a particular thing, like the design of this object. But the most important part of design now is not just a particular object like a good coffee pot or a microwave oven, whatever it might be. You know, it's the design of a system. It's the design of processes that need to be open and flexible enough to adapt to dynamic situations, but at the same time have to be coherent enough so that we know how to use it and build with it. And so again, in thinking about, uh, you know, uh, our experience with kids around the world and with teachers too, is that given this chance and given this support, they do far beyond what anybody expected. they invent much better things. They create, they know how to work it because they have the local knowledge, but then they also have the incentive to do it. It just takes the right kind of support, motivation, and resources.
In this festival, we are thinking about, or we are trying to propose that innovation is the bridge between the world in which we live now and the world that we dream of. So in that sense, and also to inspire all of us, and as the last question, what is the world that you dream for and which you work for, of course?
You know, I think the most important part, you know, human beings are amazing that we can adapt to almost anything. True. Right? It's part of our, you know, both cultures and mental process for very good reasons, right? If we couldn't adapt, well, where would we be? And how we can bring our minds to things. But we've also adapted to things that if you had someone lands from outer space tomorrow and they land there next door to you, and you have to explain, well, why is there so much war? You know, why are there still so many people going hungry? You know, why do we still see so much violence and hatred? You'd have trouble. You can say, well, it's, you know, kind of like empirically why it's happening, but well, come on, people are brilliant. Why are we still having this problem? And so my dreams for the world is like where all of a sudden these problems become, the man-made problems become unimaginable again. That the destruction of our ecosystem, right? This should be unimaginable. That what world are we leaving for our children or our grandchildren when it's like too much of the world might become uninhabitable. Too much of the world might become desert. We might lose all this land along the coast because of rising sea levels. It's like we might kill off, you know, hundreds of thousands of species in the planet. You know, so my dream is like, on the one hand, is that we improve things so much that these things become really unimaginable again. That is like, that, you know, people look at it like there was some time of, you know, social psychosis that like, yeah, people used to go to war with each other, you know, like, wow, that was a crazy time. I'm glad that's over. So this is my dream, is that we move towards this world that has more peaceful, that's more, you know, convivial, you know, that's, you know, that's, you know, that we don't have, you know, that where people aren't going hungry, or people, you don't have a category of people we call homeless, you know, that, and that we have a just and equitable world where it's not just a few can enjoy this world, but everybody can enjoy this world, and that we innovate and we create these systems that then, you know, can make this world, you know, our lived world for everybody.
We're hoping to help also to get to that new humanity, and we're looking forward to be there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thank you, David, for being here with us today, for inspiring us with your work, for giving us a little bit of light about how should we start looking for problems, how to solve them, and how to invite other peoples to also engage with this new world that we are all looking forward to live in. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, and I look forward to actually being there with you at some point in the near future.
Of course, you're more than invited. Patagonia needs everybody.
Okay, with pleasure.
Ok, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí y los dejo invitados para mañana a los paneles de el último día, en donde vamos a hablar de innovación, cómo se incentiva y los laboratorios, los labs, los Fab Labs que hay desde Atacama hasta Punta Arenas. Nos vemos, gracias.